Okay, here we go. So last week, the Red Barn Ministries put on a retreat for you for your confirmation class, and we were joined by some other parishes in Old Lyme at Christ the King. And I wanted to get your reaction overall to that retreat. What did you think about that retreat?
I really liked it.
It wasn't as boring as I thought it would be.
Very good. I could tell you guys were paying attention right off the bat. It was great. And was there anything in particular that resonated with you and that you took home from that got your attention?
He really showed that he really cares about his family because the majority of the treatment is talking about his love for his family and his son.
Shayna, could you say that a little louder for me, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. I said he showed his love for his family because in the retreat the majority of the retreat is talking about his family and his son.
Yeah, his love for his family came right out, and it's a beautiful thing. Last year in the Zoom retreat that we did with Sam, his name's Sam from the Red Barn Ministries. He had his wife on, and they talked together, and they had pictures of their family, and you could just see the love, and it was very evident, and it was refreshing, very nice. And what a special gift he views his children and blessings from God. I remember when my father passed away from lung cancer when he was 69 years old. And the last few times that I spent time with him, we would talk, and here was a guy who had a successful career. He had been an Army Air Force pilot in World War II, and he flew on 49 missions, which are a lot of missions. And just had a lot of experience, a lot of friends, did a lot of things in his life. But the one thing that he wanted to talk about was the joy that having children brought to his life, and how he just viewed that as blessings from God, which they are. And for me, at my age then, I was around 30 when he passed. It left a lasting impression, that conversation, and I often think back to that. And now, since I've had my own children, I certainly understand fully why he would feel that way. And to hear from Sam last week is confirming as well, because he just shares his joy of being a father. Okay, it's beautiful. Okay, so there were other aspects of the talk. He spoke very factually about what we know, like you would read of any other historical figure, Jesus of Nazareth. And it wasn't like, even from a Catholic perspective, it was just from a historical perspective, who this man, God, was 2,000 years ago. And, he presented the evidence, what we know, the facts, what we know, and it's very compelling story. Whatever your beliefs are, all right? And he talked about that. He talked about atheists and how they might react to certain facts about Christ. And then he went into the Big Bang Theory. Remember that? Now, he spent a lot of time on that, just as far as the creation of the world. And the fact that it was a Catholic priest who first theorized about the Big Bang Theory. That was interesting. I had read that before, but I forgot it. And so it was nice to be reminded about that fact, okay? So really what Sam was doing there, there's a term for that, and it's called being an apologist, okay? I had to look this up because when you hear the word apologist, it sounds to me like somebody who's apologizing for something, right? But an apologist, I'll read the definition because I wrote it down here, is one who speaks or writes in defense of someone or something. So what Sam was doing was speaking, he wasn't writing, he was speaking out in defense of Christianity. And I thought it was a very powerful 4 hours we spent with him. So that's what an apologist is, and for a portion of his talk, that's exactly what he was doing. And I have to tell you that a lot of the material that we're going to cover this year, and have done some already, is along the same line as that. So there's more to come if you enjoy that kind of thing and learn from it. I hope you appreciate that kind of information and should be confirming, there's that word, confirming, confirmation, confirming for your faith when you hear and you had to be impressed with what an intelligent guy he is, right? He's a smart guy, well-read, and he came across that way. So I really enjoyed that retreat, and I hope, just a little background on the Red Barn Ministries and Sam. Sam used to learn and support another guy who would do retreats for us for years. Sean Forrest was his name. He's still alive, he's still doing the same thing, but he and his wife live in Nashville, Tennessee now, so we don't fly him in, but Sam kind of worked under him and learned from Sean, and some of the material was the same as what Sean Forrest used to do. Sean also was a very talented guy. He could play the guitar and sing really well, and he was very funny with his stories that he would tell. Very entertaining. He put on a great retreat. But certainly Sam and the Red Barn Ministries, I'm excited about having them come back in the future. I'm really glad that we have them so close, Higginham, right? He said he was from Higginham. All right. So anything else on the retreat before we move into the next thing that I want to cover? Any other comments about the retreat? Okay. All right, we're going to move on then. We have a few students who are missing tonight. Not too many. We have a pretty good crew here. But I thought after having 4 classes and a retreat, it would be a good time to summarize what we've learned so far in CCD this year. Okay? So I'm going to whiz through quickly because most of you have been in class for these 4 classes. Now, some of you might have missed a class. I see, there's a few people who missed some of these classes that we're going to review that are here tonight. So you're going to be hearing about this information, this material for the first time. And for the rest of you who were in class, this will be a good time as I run through this, just as a reminder of what we went over. See if some of it comes back to your memory. Hopefully it will. Hopefully this won't sound like all new information and that, you absorb some of the stuff that we talked about. I'm sure it will, because I can tell that you're paying attention, because when we have breakout sessions, and I'm going to talk about the breakout sessions and the information that we shared there too, and that might help bring back some memories of these 4 classes, okay? So the first class we had was October 4th, and the theme of that class was understanding persecution and solidarity. And in parentheses, I put choosing between good and evil, okay? And the opening question was, do Catholics and other Christians still experience some types of persecution in the world today? And then we also discussed whether it would apply in the US as well. So that wasn't really a question that we delved into, but I wanted you to be thinking about that as we got farther into that subject. And then we defined a couple things. We defined persecution, hostility, and ill treatment, especially because of race or political or religious beliefs. Solidarity, we defined as a unity or agreement of feeling or action, especially among individuals with a common interest, a mutual support within a group, okay? So I'm trying to encourage in that first class, all of you to realize that you have to make a choice on the whole persecution thing. And we got into cyberbullying and teen suicide and some uncomfortable subjects. Hopefully you guys aren't embroiled in that. And we talked about how the internet can be a great thing, even socially, you know, to socialize and whatever, what you do on the internet. But we also talked about how it can be a real problem for vulnerable teenagers in the age group that you're in right now. And since we had that class, Facebook has been in the news big time on exactly this subject. I'm sure you've been hearing about it in the news, okay? You know, Congress is weighing in, they're evaluating all this, and, you know, it's a huge topic, okay? We talked about it in our class, and just in the past few weeks, it's really taken off as far as the nation's attention and the world's attention. It's not just our nation, okay? So this isn't just some small topic that we picked up on in CCD, but it has really taken on a new life of its own recently. We read an article about smartphones are grenades in our kids' pockets, okay, which was a bit of a dramatic title, but we learned what the author, Maria Panaritis's point was with that. And then we went into the facts on teen suicide. When we had a breakout, we asked the question, what are some examples of people grouping together in a show of solidarity today in the US? Solidarity in the US. And I also asked room 2, their question was examples of suffering in your life today as typical freshmen in high school, okay? So some of the things that came back, we had Gabe and Grace and Shayna, Regan, and Campbell weighed in, and here were some of the things. The examples of solidarity in the US that you shared: Black Lives Matter movement, okay? All big in the news in the past few years. That's been a huge topic. Vaxxers and non-vaxxers we talked about, right? The vaccine for the pandemic that we're in, okay, with COVID. We also talked about social media related to posts and comments, you know, and I think the point there, I'm sure the point there was that, you know, as people weigh in on topics on social media and they post things and they comment things, you know, people take sides. So, you know, some people are in solidarity on one position on a topic, and others take an opposing side, and then other people weigh in on that. So that can be a healthy thing. It can be an unhealthy thing. So if it's something that you're enjoying and you're learning from, you know, take part in it. I would encourage you to. But as soon as it starts being, you know, something that is stressing you out, that's time to back away. Okay, that's a good time to take a break from it. Okay. Because in years from now, you're going to look back, I'm sure, and you're going to look at back and you're going to say, well, some of that I was involved with had a positive influence in my life. I learned some topics and whatnot, and other stuff, maybe I got a little too hung up on that and it was bothering me and I didn't realize it for too long. You don't want to ever have regrets looking back at your freshman year in high school. Okay, so this is all something that you should be in solidarity with. As Christians and as Catholics in this confirmation class we're in, to help each other out through that, okay? You can have each other's back on that type of thing, okay? That's what I'd like to hear. Shana also mentioned about depression and suicide, okay, during this conversation that we had on these topics. Now, examples of suffering, stress making new friends came up. And certainly as freshmen, you're new in a new school, even though a lot of you knew each other from middle school and stuff, but maybe some of you have moved into the area or transferred from a different school system. So stress making new friends, common topic. And again, you're not alone if you have those, if you're dealing with that, okay? That's something that, you know, you have company as freshmen in high school, okay? That's very typical. Not making a sport team, that can be very difficult setback when you worked hard and tried out for a team and you don't make the team. That's tough. Stress over a lot of homework, we talked about. Stress over tests, balancing your lives, sports and studying. And then we went further, and Campbell mentioned deciding what you want to do for the rest of your lives, okay? Yeah, there's you know, some stress in that. You know, you shouldn't be stressing yourselves out too much as freshmen. You got a lot of time to think about it. It's good that you are thinking about it, but you got to keep it in perspective and trust in God through the process. Remember to use prayer. Prayer should be a part of your life, as well as all the other learning methods that you have for learning what's out there, and healthy evaluations from your teachers and parents and coaches and friends, you know, as far as where your strengths and weaknesses are. But prayer is a huge part of that, and I hope you remember that always. Okay, so that was pretty much the first class. We did do some reading, New Testament readings. We read about Saint Stephen, the first martyr, the first Catholic martyr. And he was stoned to death for a speech he gave that angered the Jewish people at the time, a number of scribes and Pharisees among there. And among that crowd, one Pharisee was collecting the cloaks of those who were stoning Stephen to death, and his name was Saul. And we would later learn a lot about Saul and Saul's conversion, which was very dramatic. Okay, we read out of Mark. We read a section called Against Ambition and Envy. And the reason that we read from that was, you know, Jesus was relaying this story. It says, you know, they returned to Capernaum, and Jesus, once inside the house, began to ask them, "What were you discussing on the way home?" At this, they fell silent, for on the way they had been arguing about who was the most important among them. Okay, so he sat down and called the 12 around him, and he said, "If anyone wishes to rank first, he must remain the last one of all and the servant of all." Then he took a little child, stood him in their midst, and putting his arm around him, said to them, "Whoever welcomes a child such as this for my sake welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but him who sent me," referring to God the Father. Then he goes further. John said to him, "Teacher, we saw a man using your name to expel demons, and we tried to stop him because he is not of our company." Jesus said in reply, "Do not try to stop him. No man who performs a miracle using my name can at the same time speak ill of me. Anyone who is not against us is with us. Any man who gives you a drink of water because you belong to Christ will not, I assure you, go without his reward. But it would be better if anyone who leads astray one of these simple believers were to be plunged in the sea with a great millstone fastened around his neck." Boy, that's one way of driving the point home. Okay, so that's about solidarity. And not judging others. See, John was kind of judging others because that man wasn't of their particular company, but he was doing good things in Christ's name. So not, you know, then our next class, That's a nice segue. We also finished with a prayer for persecuted Christians at the end of that first class. Our next class was on that topic of avoiding judgment. That's why we had that reading, because it was kind of setting the stage for the next class, avoiding judgment. And we asked the question to think about it. What does it mean as a Christian to be a light? Remember, Christ said to be a light. And we read about that out of Matthew. And we came back to that in last week's or 2 weeks ago in class when we read and heard a video, watched a video on the Sermon on the Mount. Okay, be a light, salt of the earth and the light of the world. Okay, symbols of Christians from Jesus's description. Okay, but in this class, avoiding judgment, we learned a few things. We learned scribes. Who are the scribes and who are these Pharisees? Because when you're reading the gospel, you keep hearing about these scribes and Pharisees. And if you don't know who they are, it can be kind of confusing. So we learned that a scribe was an ancient Jewish record keeper, or later a professional theologian and jurist, someone who studies religion. A Pharisee, a member of an ancient Jewish sect, distinguished by strict observance of the traditional and written law, and commonly held to have pretensions to superior sanctity. Okay, and remember that St. Paul, as Saul, was a Pharisee, and he grew up, his father was a Pharisee, his grandfather was a Pharisee. He was a Pharisee among Pharisees, he called himself. And that's what he was. And he was very serious about his Jewish faith. And he took it to a point where he was trying to persecute Christians who he felt, were promoting something that he didn't believe was true. Okay. And then we also moved on and we learned what a parable is. A parable is a simple story to illustrate a moral or spiritual lesson as told by Jesus in the Gospels. And then we went right into reading the prodigal son, which is a great parable. That was the man who had two sons, and one of the sons, the younger of the two sons, asked for all of his inheritance, and he left his father, and he squandered all of his wealth. And a great famine came into the land, and he had a job feeding pigs. He was hungry all the time. He decided, enough of this. I'm going to go back and apologize to my father, who, by the way, the father was representing God the Father. And when he came back and his father saw the son, the prodigal son, returning, he didn't wait for him saying, oh, here comes this son of mine now, because there's a famine in the land. No. He and the servants ran out and greeted him, put a robe on him, sandals on his feet, a ring on his finger, killed the fatted calf. We're going to celebrate, okay? And that's the same way that God treats us when we've gone astray, okay? Because we're human beings. Our fallen nature, we sin sometimes. Never, ever feel that you can't turn back to God, no matter what it is, how awful, whatever is bothering you, okay? Never feel that God won't accept you back, okay? That's the devil telling you that, okay? But God, no, he will welcome you back. Now, the story takes a twist because the older son, and the symbol here was the older son, represented these Pharisees, scribes and Pharisees, with their judgmental attitudes. The older son was jealous. He was asking, what's the commotion about? And one of the servants informed him that his brother came back and that his father had killed the fatted calf, and they were singing and dancing and celebrating and having a feast, and he wanted none of it. And so then you hear the conversation between the father and the second son, and we learn how important it is not to be judgmental, okay? It's not up to us to judge others, okay? Leave that up to God, okay? He's very good at this. He can handle that job, not up for us, okay? But we also talked about avoiding judgment and how we fall into that trap. And then we talked about how we don't like to be judged ourselves, especially unfairly. Now, that's Very different from being evaluated by a parent or a coach or a teacher. That's their job, okay? So that's different, but you know what I'm talking about here with regarding, being judged unfairly. So we had a breakout session and we asked, what are some of the examples, situations you find yourself where you're tempted to be judgmental of others? And the room 2 discussed what situations can you find yourself in where you are being judged by others, and had some good feedback. And some of it just in the summary here, Grace and Gabe, Shayna weighed in here. And, we situations tempted to judge others, first impressions by how somebody presents or carries themselves, what they wear, and to some degree, we're just taking in information, but if we go too far with that and we start, casting judgment or pigeonholing somebody, that's not a good thing, okay? And then we talked about situations you find yourself in where you're being judged. And, we talked about sports teams' logos and the way that we dress. So it works both ways, okay? And we also concluded we can be judged by just about anything, social media posts. You take a position on something, all of a sudden somebody's judging you about that position. Maybe he's going to come back with a counter suggestion. Okay, or argument. All right, so we talked about that. It showed me that you fully understand that topic, and it's important to know how Jesus wants us to be as Christians, okay? And it's very clearly told in the prodigal son in Luke. That's in the Gospel of Luke. We then read, we watched a video about St. Paul. It was about 14 minutes long, and it showed him, he had written letters to the officials and authorities in Damascus. He wanted to be able to travel there, and he wanted to be able to drag people out of their homes who were following the new way, which was Christianity, is Christianity, still new, the new way. And that's what he wanted to do. And he wanted to throw them into prison or worse. And on his way, he was hit by a blinding light, knocked off of his horse, couldn't see. For 3 days, he had to be led into Damascus and led around and helped blind. And we saw that whole video reenactment, very well done. And I hope you remember that. And then we went into the Acts of the Apostles and we read the section called The Vocation of Saul, which told the same story, but those words are right out of the Bible. So just to help confirm all that. Okay, so those are some of the things that we learned. We also read out of Matthew, love of enemies, and we read another section, Matthew, avoiding judgment. Now, love of enemies, that was a nice segue into a future class, which was the Sermon on the Mount, the New Way, Christ's groundbreaking teachings on the Sermon on the Mount, which we learned about. At the end of that second class, Avoiding Judgment, we had a closing prayer, beautiful prayer, prayer of St. Francis. So it's a great prayer, and I hope you remember that one. All right, so that was class 2.